Hello again and welcome to I've Got a Beatles podcast with Dave and Chris, and we're going to put them in the movies today. It's been a while since we've looked at a Beatle movie, and this is an interesting one, I think, that is only a couple of years old. So I don't know, where did you first hear about the Beatles in India?
Well, I just want to say, Dave and I, of course, dressed in
Oh,
white robes,
yeah,
and we're sitting on the floor cross-legged
correct,
as we talk
correct.
about the Beatles in India. Yeah, I heard it kind of kicking around, and I wasn't, when this was announced or first started being talked about, you're like, what is this? Is this a low budget, one of these things you get, because sometimes you're like, oh, look, it's a Beatles documentary,
No,
but it's just like you're searching on Amazon Prime or something, and then you start watching in 10 seconds and you realize, oh no, this is a real crappy,
yeah,
poorly done, very low budget and probably produced by a television station type documentary. But this isn't that. It's an independently produced documentary. It is does not have the cooperation of, say, Paul McCartney, or I
yeah,
don't think Olivia Harrison's not being interviewed, but there are some legitimate interviews in it,
yeah. We'll get into all that.
and it's a legitimate documentary.
And from the title of it, The Beatles in India, you can figure out what it's about. It was directed by a musician and actor. I guess it's AJ or Ajoy
Mm-hmm.
Bose.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's it came hot off the heels of another book that it came out, I don't know, a few years before that, about the Beatles in India, and had lots of pictures. And it
Yep.
was done by a guy, Paul Saltzman, who was there with them, and who I don't think is in this movie actually. But it's kind of the whole purpose behind this movie, I think, is to tell and kind of elaborate on the relationship between the Beatles in India, how it got started, what it was like when the Beatles went to India, what the impact was, what the reaction was from actual Indians, and you have a lot of footage. We've seen the footage before, some of the stuff in the movie from the anthology and other places where the Beatles are in Rishikesh,
Yeah.
or going to Bangor to hear the Maharishi and things, but it's presented in a very different kind of way. So maybe we can begin with your overall thoughts or your kind of general thoughts before we dig in.
Yeah, it came off to me mostly focused on the that trip, that famous lengthy trip to Rishikesh, and seeing those. It's almost like a little tour guide film of seeing these locations
Yeah.
and having some of the people who were involved with the Beatles being there, the daughter of a guy who owned the ashram, and the publicist of the Maharishi,
Yeah.
and some people of that nature, talking a lot about giving you like a ground level. They slept here. They were here. They would hang out at this spot of the river a lot. Some things like that. So there's some of that, but I think there's also a lot of little details here and there on a broader level of the cultural impact of the Beatles getting interested in Indian music, and how that spread Indian music, how Indian music and psychedelia
Oh yeah.
were kind of like blended together a little bit. So I most of the interesting parts to me are these little tidbits
Hmm.
here and there throughout the documentary. So we can kind of
Yeah.
beat down on that. There isn't much. In fact, there isn't anything beyond the trip. I think if I had a complaint at all, it'd be like they talk about, obviously, they talk about how George and Ravi Shankar got together, got to meet each other.
Right.
George's first separate trip to India, which I didn't know much about
I didn't either.
before
No, that
watching
was
this.
that was new.
Yeah, so we'll get into that. But the impact afterwards of George spreading Indian music, I think, is like humongous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just didn't seem to be mentioned. So
No, I mean,
I found that a little odd. in a documentary talking about this topic that there's part of the topic that they don't go into. Maybe it's just because they didn't have the cooperation, obviously, of Olivia Harrison, and they couldn't talk about some of those things with any sort of like footage or any
cooperation.
It would have just been Mark Lewisohn probably talking about it, and nobody else. So.
And speaking of, so some of the people that there are some talking heads in the movie, including Mark Lewisohn, which that was a surprise when all of a sudden Mark Lewisohn appears on the screen. So he's in there a few times. Steve Turner, who wrote a couple of books, like the stories behind the songs type books for Lennon and for the Beatles, he's in there. You've got, to me, the strangest one was a disembodied Patti Boyd, who you never see, but you hear her. Very strange. Suddenly this voice appears and you'll see the Ganges River flowing or something. So I don't know what that was about.
Maybe that was I don't know.
Permission.
Could be one thing or another. It could be they shot the footage and then the footage looked poor. So they just went with the audio.
Yeah.
Or it could have been Patti doesn't want to be seen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. And then there are a lot of, like you said, people who were actually on the ground in the various locations in India. You've got some Indian musicians, and I found my ones I liked were the owners of music shops where the Beatles went and picked up sitars, or Mal Evans went to get them. So you get kind of those the side people who were not literally in the story but made it possible. I thought that was kind of interesting to talk to them because their stories are never told. So that was pretty interesting. And then some Indian rock musicians too, who that to me that was sort of the superfluous. It wasn't really that interesting how the Beatles, how these Indian rock groups would play Beatles songs. That didn't really so they did that everywhere. That wasn't too big to me, but you know, they talk about
the only thing I thought that showed was that they did have an impact, whereas a few years before they wouldn't even have any Western music.
That's true.
That once the Beatles came, now we've got Western music infiltrating Indian culture,
right,
and vice versa, because of the Beatles getting interested in Indian culture. It obviously spread across the world. And then there was also interviews with, I thought the best, or one of the funniest, was the reporter Saeed Naqvi.
Oh yeah,
I think was his name.
Yeah,
who snuck in, and some of his attitude towards everything I thought was really funny.
Yeah, definitely.
So
they you know, pretty good amount of information and people they interviewed. If you're expecting to hear any Beatles songs, you won't. There's no songs in here. I assume that's from copyright reasons. You'll hear these kind of composed Indian type music. But it's not in there.
It was it's all score.
It's score.
And there's even when they talked to this Indian band, the Savages, the part you said you weren't interested in. That we don't hear any of their music.
No.
I was like, why not at least play the Savages music? I don't get that. So maybe it was just for keep the costs low, and
probably
these things aren't easy to produce, films for sure. I know that.
No.
A couple tidbits early on that didn't really know. George's mom apparently listened to new music when he was a kid. So
that was surprising.
Was surprising. So that was interesting. They show a little bit of footage from Help, and someone explained how offensive Help would have been at the time to people. And you know, this is probably just when they're just getting into the Indian music and Indian culture, but they haven't even met Ravi Shankar yet, and they don't know much about it, but they're using it as plot points in this film and
stereotypes,
and so they said, you know, that would have been very offensive to Indian people at the time. But of course, obviously, very shortly after that, they start to get into Indian music. These shopkeepers talk about how, well, a Beatle visits my shop, and then the next week I'm just selling out on tablas and
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
So
Well, and I think they do make the point to that, to the issue about help, is that there is a complicated relationship between the UK and India for being a colonizing power, and so I think that does play into it a bit. But as we also mentioned, and as they mentioned, colonization goes both ways, or the influences go both ways. So
yeah.
what the Beatles may have taken from India, then the Indian musicians took back in some ways, and Ravi Shankar certainly did this. And they talk about it, how he was happy to play at Monterey, and he was happy to play at all these Western festivals to
Mhm.
spread his music, but no doubt popularity and certainly money and exposure too.
Yeah.
So it works mutually well.
They do dive in through the voice of Patti Boyd of George meets Ravi Shankar, and then he
Yeah.
takes a trip to India, studying with Ravi, attending concerts, getting too much attention, getting frustrated with that attention. They play a previously unheard, except when it aired in India, interview that they found. So that was like a little radio interview with George, mostly complaining, "Hey, I want to be on. Hey, I want a vacation too, guys. Leave me alone."
Was that the same section where they had that interview with the woman who tried to go up to his hotel? Well, she did get into his hotel,
Yeah,
and he was not happy to see her because,
yeah. He's like, "Tell everybody if they like me to leave me alone."
yes, exactly, exactly.
So, and then they talk in the Savages, and that group was in there too. Little tiny touch on Wonderwall, just that
Yeah.
George is starting to actually use Indian musicians and further sort of start to blend Indian and popular music. I think that was what that
Hmm.
section was trying to get at. And then it also talked about how they'd done LSD, and people who would be open to hearing Indian music some at the time also might have been experimenting with drugs. So you get this Dick Cavett interview where he
Oh
says,
yeah.
is taking drugs and the bizarre music. He's like talking to Ravi Shankar, saying bizarre music, and George is like, "Don't call it bizarre music, you idiot." Sort of takes him to task. But
Yeah.
but so that section of the film's nice and everything, but it seemed like truncated.
Hmm.
And then we were done with Ravi Shankar. We're like, all right, bye bye.
Yeah, I know, and
Seemed a
especially
little odd.
it was a little odd because we know, well, and part of it is what we said earlier, is that they don't talk about anything after Rishikesh really,
Yeah,
and yet we know the Bangladesh concert. George produced Ravi. They were lifelong friends. His last TV performance was with Ravi. I mean,
yeah,
you could have shown a lot more or talked about that relationship, but
yeah,
I think
yeah.
they it was, some of that was kind of well tread material that we already knew that George was serious about. He was most serious, and he wanted to be a good sitar player
Yeah.
and good
It
student.
it is covered, I think, a little bit, at least in Living in the Material
Yeah,
World.
exactly. That's what I
So
was thinking of.
probably they were like, all right, let's not trod the same ground.
Yeah, yeah.
But instead they get into the Beatles and the Maharishi.
Yes.
And I find that this documentary is probably the most well-rounded you're gonna get. All of the other documentaries probably just sort of like paint this with a broad brush and use the same claims as to how the relationship frayed,
Including the
which,
Beatles anthology.
including the Beatles anthology, which is, oh, Maharishi started, like, there started being stories about him feeling up women,
Right.
and they were like, okay, that's enough, we're done,
Yeah.
and this guy isn't who we thought he was. Well, that doesn't seem to be that much of a factor in this, in the this what seems to be an actual account
Mm-hmm.
of how they got together, how it was when they were there, who was really into it, who wasn't so into it, And the multiple reasons it seems that things started to fray and they started to pull back from Maharishi. So
Yes, so that's
yeah,
great. Good thing to talk about, because that to me was also the most interesting part. So, you know, you get a lot of things you'd seen before if you'd seen the anthology with the footage and Rishikesh with, like you said, the wearing the white robes, and
yeah,
John and Paul with their guitars and hanging around the campfire sort of thing, and Mike Love and Donovan and
yeah.
you know,
And Brian dying, and
yeah, Brian
Maharishi
dying.
sort of
Mhm.
taking the place of Brian and all
Right,
that.
right.
So you get a little bit of that at the beginning, but and how they got together and stuff, which it's all the same
Yeah,
well trod information that we all have. But actually showing the Rishikesh camp, talking about how Rishikesh was sort of extra fortified for privacy, but this reporter got in,
there was a
so he
bridge. You had to go over this bridge of the
yeah.
Ganges. Yeah. And so tell what's this that's a great story about how the reporter actually kind of embedded into the Beatles camp.
Yeah, he's like, if I became an insider, then I'd start to get the story. So I had to come up with some reasons that I wanted to go there because of drugs or whatever. And this guy was hilarious at one point of this thing. I think the funniest part of the whole thing is he basically like, they give you this gibberish which goes on, and the longer it goes on, the more profoundly affected they pretend to be.
Mm,
It was basically calling meditation arcane nonsense.
yeah, yeah.
So I like that you had that guy, and then you also had this lady who's written a book about, who is like seemingly still into Maharishi,
Yes.
who's in Shumki, who's
Hmm.
written a book about the Maharishi. And so I like that you get these different perspectives
Yeah.
in the documentary. So
Yeah, so that guy got he somehow he became part of the group, the Maharishi's group, so he would attend the lectures, and so
yeah,
that's how he got in when the Beatles arrived, because like you said, it was fortified and very hard for anyone else to get in.
yeah.
And so, you know,
Him and somebody else trying to sneak a private photograph. They got
right,
this one photograph, sort of a
right.
candid photograph. So yeah,
Yeah. And so you see from the people who live there and work there, they'll show you like a picture of the where John and Paul slept at the time, so in 68, and then they'll show it today. And I
mm-hmm.
have to say, it looks pretty run down, looks pretty
Yeah,
crummy nowadays,
yeah.
and falling apart. But you can still
Probably
go
didn't
there.
look that great
No,
at the
probably
time either.
probably not.
Yeah,
Just yeah, we think it looked better. But you get a sense of what their daily routine was, and the kinds of things they did, and there's some video I hadn't seen of Paul washing his face in the Ganges, or John standing there with his guitar. It was just kind of cool footage to
they're
see.
also pronouncing Ganges like
Ga-
the Ganga, which
Ganga,
is sort of
yeah,
how most people in India, I guess,
yeah,
pronounce it.
maybe the
But us
Hindi
Americans are like Ganges.
Ganges.
So
Yeah, so that was pretty interesting. Uh,
there are
and
also
then
some secondary stories of like this woman who lived near there, was a Beatles fan,
oh
and
yeah,
George asked her to snuggle up when she didn't, and so she regrets it to this day. That
yes,
was funny.
yeah,
The another negative story about a woman who was part of the, came there to study, and then I thought, oh, this is going to go really dark, like a terrible place where, you know,
yeah,
but it didn't. It was just she had bad feelings. She didn't like she was there. He's like, here, I give you this, go to this room and do this mantra, and you'll have this profound experience.
yeah.
And she just wanted to get out of there. And so she's like, oh yeah, I had a profound experience. Thumbs up. So she just like left.
Yeah,
So that was interesting too.
yeah. I think certainly Well, and this is to me, and apologies to our listeners if you all knew this already, but I didn't, and I don't know if Chris did either. But to the point you made earlier about the the story about what we'd been told about how things went down, I was not aware of a certain player who was involved.
Oh, this guy.
Apparently, yeah, apparently as much as he was. We know him for other reasons, for other bad reasons, but we should talk about what the movie asserts about the influence of Magic Alex.
Yeah, yeah. So there's two big things about the sort of breakup of them, and for one thing, I think it just had run its course anyway, and
Yeah.
people like you can't stay out in the like one of them like what they've been out there several months,
Well,
you know.
and half the group had already left because Paul and Ringo had
Yeah,
split.
Ringo's tummy couldn't
Yeah.
take the food, so that was he brought a bunch of cans of beans and he'd run out of the beans, so
Right.
because he got bad allergies, so he left early.
And then Paul
Yeah,
left. Yeah.
Paul left because Jane Asher had a commitment or something.
Yeah.
But when it gets to this ending part, Magic Alex came in and was like, "Hey, I'm supposed to be the guru of John Lennon, not this guy."
Yeah.
So it's almost like some of the rumor stuff that was about the Maharishi was, I don't know if it was just bullshit that Magic Alex was coming up with, or if he'd heard some things and was spreading it, but particularly to get the Beatles out of there
Right.
so that they can come back, and he's got John Lennon's back, and he's, oh, I'm gonna,
Well, that was the impression I got from the movie, that they were
yeah,
arguing that he was just making stuff up or trying to spread rumors that Maharishi was being untoward with
yeah,
women, and not Mia Farrow, Prudence Farrow, and kind of just being kind of sleazy.
yeah,
And so then John, as we know, John was not John didn't mind jumping on the bandwagon or jumping on the first thing he heard and believing everything he hears
yeah,
without deep critical thinking. So
yeah,
in
yeah,
this case, maybe he's like, "Oh yeah, this is terrible, George. We got to go. This guy's a bum. Let's get
yeah,
out of here."
yeah.
So
Once again, being and maybe you think Maharishi is a charlatan,
yeah,
which the other part of the talking about sort of how it was ending was, well, Maharishi, without their permission, put
oh yeah,
advisor to the Beatles on his record. There was some confusion about hiring two different documentary crews, but
yeah,
one he'd signed a contract with that said exclusive for 5 years. But it just seemed it seemed like he just was not very good with business stuff to
yeah,
me.
yeah,
So and maybe overstepped his bounds a little bit in, oh, I got the Beatles here. Maybe I can spread my message a little bit by saying I got the Beatles.
yeah,
So I think it was like more about that, it seemed to me, than any kind of, well, maybe it was Magic Alex and the rumors, and then there's that famous footage again of them like, oh well, he seemed like he was something more and he's just a guy, so like that kind of thing.
yeah,
And some of this stuff, they even take a trip to Sweden, I guess,
yeah,
to see Maharishi to tell him to cool it a little bit. But at any rate, they sort of break up
right,
with Maharishi. Now you did get a little bit after that, telling the tale that's never told, really, that later on, years later, that George would come and kind of apologize for
yeah,
how it ended with them. that Maharishi would go on for many, many, many years and just kind of do the same thing, teaching meditation. And
Yeah, he lived to be very old. So
yeah, so it
yeah.
wasn't like he was like canceled
No.
because of any of it.
No.
He might have just been like, oh, okay, well, times,
Yeah.
that's the way it
Yeah.
goes, about the
Right.
whole thing. Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah, I think so maybe in a way when you're laying that out, it is maybe it's three things, three reasons why it ended. One was just natural, it's just long enough, and they kind of got what they needed. And
mhm.
I mean, they got a whole bunch of songs out of it and
Yeah,
got the next album, been pretty good start.
yeah. And
And
they go
then
into some of that, but I'm glad they didn't go into too much of that because
no,
we've all heard
I've
all of
heard
those
that
stories,
before.
the Prudence story and all that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a little bit of the Prudence thing here, but
Yeah, but
not
not
too
much.
much.
So you have that, and then you've got the Magic Alex
Yeah,
theory, and then the business theory too. So I don't know. It
yeah,
probably is a mixture.
yeah. There were a couple other like real big takeaways. I like a couple other like great moments. One is they're talking about Maharishi and what he told the individual Beatles about themselves. Particularly George was the most into all of this, obviously.
Yeah.
And George, it said, and this was Patti talking, that George really grappling about why he's famous, and that Maharishi told him this was his last life. So all of
Mm.
his reincarnations, this was it. Which I'm like, huh? How's that work? Um, and then he told John Lennon he has many lives to go. And they were talking about how John Lennon out there just seemed to just kind of be improving over the time, probably because he was getting off of drugs
Drugs. Yeah.
and about halfway through seemed like livelier and friendlier and all that.
Didn't we
You know?
see that in the Get Back movie too, when he sort of
Yeah.
yeah cleaned up a little bit?
And then it's telling Ringo he had a lot of feeling and heart. So I thought that was interesting. I don't think
Yeah.
I don't even remember them talking about what he told Paul.
No, I don't either.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
so that was interesting. But one of the funniest footage to me was they had footage of a KGB agent.
Oh
And they
yeah,
talked
this
a
is
little
weird.
bit about political, like was there a CIA watching him and
Yeah.
but there's this KGB agent, and he thought Maharishi, not sure if he was a crook or not, but this is all great for us because all these Americans get into this and then they zonk themselves out with hashish and crazy idea of meditation, and like as if meditation can solve any of the world's issues. It makes
Yeah.
it leads to more of the demoralization of American society. So he's not a KGB. He was like kind of confirming he's not a KGB agent, but everything he's doing is helping us. Haha.
Right, right, exactly. And he went there too. He didn't he go? He went to Rishikesh or went
Oh,
to
yeah, I think
yeah.
so.
There's
So,
pictures of him. Yeah. Oh,
so
that was kind of
crazy
funny.
stuff, but it was very funny
Yeah.
to see this KGB agent who's like had this take on meditation of it being like a real negative like
Right.
thing. So
But
good. Let them get
brainwashing.
into that.
Yeah.
Let them just distract themselves with feeling good, instead of thinking politically. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And then it just sort of ends, like you said, because it
Yeah.
doesn't give us a what happened after this. Just kind of, well, yeah, this was a time, and it was interesting meeting them. And it actually didn't end with some guy who gives tours now of Rishikesh. I remember there was
Yeah.
some guy giving tours, and so you can do that now if you go there.
Yeah.
You can get a Beatle tour. But yeah, I think overall pretty positive movie. It's not long. It's only about an hour and a half,
Yeah.
and breezes
I
by.
you watched it through your free
Yeah, I
what's the
watched.
library website?
Yeah, you can watch it if you have a public library that subscribes to Canopy. This would be for US people only. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have a public library, it's on Canopies. That's where I saw it. And then you
I
downloaded it or you
purchased it
purchased it.
through, now it is free if you have BritBox. It's free through there. It's part of the BritBox program that you're subscribing for. That's a subscription service. I didn't do that though. I don't have BritBox. I just bought it, and it was only $4.99
Oh, okay.
on Amazon
Okay.
Prime. So, and I think it's available through Voodoo and all those
Yeah,
ones that you pay and buy it or rent it.
right.
I think it was like $1 less to rent it. So I'm like, okay, I'll pay an extra $1 and I'll be able to watch it at my leisure and a couple of times. And I
Yeah.
did watch it. I sort of skim watched it the second time. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. What would you say are if you had to pick the three biggest takeaways or most interesting parts?
Just the ending stuff that we talked about, how it broke up.
Yeah.
Seeing the locations and seeing some of the footage of like the river and all that, and the just the area. It's like, wow, India is really
Gorgeous.
beautiful and
Yeah.
gorgeous. And then just the funny thing about the reporter and him just being, oh, it's all bullshit. I'm just in there
Right.
trying to get a story.
Yeah.
So just thinking about somebody like that in with people who are actually there trying to have an experience, and he's like,
Hmm.
he's just poo-pooing it.
I'd add to that of course, I'm always looking at it for the musical angle, but looking just how the Beatles were, and particularly George, were very interested in the music and
Yeah.
learning about the music and hearing the story about how they met Ravi Shankar, how George met Ravi at a dinner party, and it was kind of a low key meeting. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't here comes famous George Harrison meeting Ravi Shankar. It was just, oh, here a friend introducing, hey, here's this guy Ravi Shankar, and why don't you guys talk? And they just hit it off immediately.
Yeah, there was another section of the Indian shopkeeper too, and that they brought a bunch of instruments in for, I think, Patti Boyd's birthday party or
Right,
something,
right.
and then that Indian shopkeeper and a guy who taught Indian music back then we're there and on the site, and oh yeah, here we were at the party and that kind of thing. So that was also in there.
Yeah,
So it
some
wasn't just
insider.
yeah, it was talking. Yeah, obviously it's like interesting to hear the actual stuff about actual Beatles playing Indian music and
Yeah, yeah,
stuff like that. So
yeah. Well, very good. So on a scale of 4 stars, what do we say here? What would you give it?
for me, like 3.
Yeah, that's actually exactly. Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
3 stars, and uh, could have been more, but
Yeah.
for we learned stuff, and I think you would too, definitely.
I mean, we've got a bunch of Ringo movies to watch coming up for this. Put them in the movies, so this will be a relief from that.
That's true. We have,
So,
yeah, when we were deciding which put him in the movies to do next, we had a Ringo movie. We won't say because we're going to do it eventually, but
yeah.
we decided, oh, you know what? Why don't we do the India movie first? And I'm
Yeah.
glad we did, because it was enjoyable and well worth a watch.
Yeah. So news wise, we're stuck in neutral again. Other than the Ringo song is out, and you
Yeah,
can check out the Ringo song, and the EP is coming out
fairly soon, actually.
soon-ish.
Yeah.
So we'll have obviously a review of that. So we won't even talk about it now until.
No.
To be honest with you, I haven't even gotten around to listening to it.
Well, it's because you want to just savor the entire EP
yeah,
in its full glory.
that's right.
On
That's
cassette,
right.
on the
That's right.
$25 cassette that
The
you
25, the cassette or the CD.
Yeah.
Who's buying it? I don't know. I don't know. We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
We'll talk about it when we
So
get to
there's
that.
There no news on the Beatles potential red and blue and maybe green sets. Who knows? Who
Nope.
knows what's going on with that? no news. Well, very vague on one website news about potentially some George releases, which seem to be vinyl only releases, re-releases of the vinyl. But I'm going to hold judgment on all of that until we get actual details.
Yeah.
But if it's just getting them back in circulation, a lot of them are still in circulation.
Yeah.
So why
Easy
do we
to get.
need it? It's just because the label has relaunched, the Dark Horse label. But maybe they'll be, I don't know, good release, like good audiophile releases of it. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We will see.
We will see.
But no news from Paul.
No, the one thing Paul related, I did. We haven't talked about it on the show. I don't think we'll talk about it in our holiday gifts episode, no doubt. But I did check out Eyes of the Storm from my public library in Kansas City, and I read it through, and glad I didn't pay $75 for it. But it is nice and worth looking at if you like those. There is actually a pretty good amount of Paul's writing and reminiscing in there, so that was definitely worth a look. And I know the exhibition of his photos, which is closing in London soon, will be eventually coming to the US in New York and LA maybe. So a few typical spots that you might expect in the US will be coming, so
that's cool.
That's that.
Yeah, that would probably be the best way to experience it, I would think.
Yeah, to go see
it. If you get a discounted version of it on the book, I think it would probably be worth it.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of us paid full price for the lyrics, but now the lyrics is coming out in paperback with additional material. So now you gotta buy it again if you're a super fan. That's probably a little frustrating for some people. Oh, and the Dolly Parton single's out.
Of Let It Be.
Of Let It Be, which I haven't heard that one either. You heard it and was sort of humdrum on it.
Yeah, it was nice. It was fine. Yeah.
But let's get these sets out. Let's Paul or a new album or something. Paul is out there again.
Yes.
He has gotten back again. Got back. Well, as we know from the Rolling Stones, if you're 80 years old, you can still be releasing new material because they've got a new album coming out. So
true, with Paul and Ringo on him.
Oh yeah. So we'll see about all that stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's not. It would be great if we can come on here and be bullet pointing a bunch of releases coming out. But this has been a pathetic year of releases.
Terrible,
absolutely terrible. Sad year. Nothing. Oh, and we haven't even mentioned like John Lennon camp.
Oh yeah, nothing.
I don't know.
Crickets.
Yeah. Crickets. Nothing but nothing.
No. Maybe by the next time we record, we'll have some more news, but you can guarantee you'll hear it from us, and we'll be dissecting anything possible. So
yeah.
So thanks as always for listening, and we'll be back at you soon with a new episode.